Okay, so my name's Bunch the Drunk. I'm doing feast planning 101. I've got the class kind of broken down into a few different sections. The first section being your menu planning. When planning your menu, there's a few different aspects that I always look at when I'm trying to plan either one meal or a full event's worth of meals. First thing you always got to figure out is just how many meals you're going to be running. If you're the actual feast to crap for the event, you can choose to either run just the primary feast and then get, different groups or households, fighting companies, whatever, to run other meals, or you can choose to run all the meals yourself. It just depends on, what you want to do. Uh, Next thing I always look at is what time of the year is the event. The reason I always look at that is, during the hotter times, during the summer months, you don't want things like stews and things that are going to be really hot that are going to make people feel uncomfortable, or that are going to be really heavy on their stomachs, because going out in the field fighting in 90-degree weather while you're on a full stomach, it's going to lead you to getting sick potentially. So always try to avoid that. Whereas during the winter, you do typically want something that will kind of stick to your ribs type meals, that are going to make people feel comfortable and warm and happy inside. Uh, Next thing is, what time of day are your meals? Uh, the reason I always look at that is, for things like breakfast. I don't like to cook a heavy breakfast because it just kind of slows people down throughout the day. But you do also want something that is going to give them energy for the day. So things like fruits and oatmeal, things that are going to be kind of light but still give the energy needed to make it through to lunch, are things that you want to look at. I don't like doing a lot of a lot of people do pancakes and stuff. I think that's too heavy. A lot of greasy meats in the morning. It's a lot on a player's stomach if you're doing things like that. Whereas for lunch, lunchtime, I typically want something that's really quick and grab and go. I hate doing sandwiches for lunch. I think it's been done too many times. But I personally have done things like, I did a loaded baked potato bar, and basically it was just you grab your potato and you go down the line and pick out what toppings you want, and then you go sit down, or you can eat it while you're walking. We serve them in little cardboard, like carnival trays, or not cardboard but paper, like carnival trays, and they worked really well. It was very little cleanup for that meal. Uh, and it was just grab and go. If people came back for more, they came back for more, but it was very quick. And that's what you kind of want to look at for lunch, just because people want to get back out on the field and actually enjoy the rest of the event. You don't want something that's going to have them sitting down and lose energy because they've been sitting for an hour and they've lost their momentum. Let's see. Next thing is, how many meals are you actually planning for? If you've got, or not how many meals, how many people are you planning for? I'm sorry. How many people are you planning for? Because that's going to affect, everything. You're going to, typically base what you're cooking around how many people you're cooking for. Because if you're cooking for, 50 people, you can do kind of bigger things than if you were cooking for 200 people. It's not going to be, the same time, cooking time and everything. So you've really got to figure out how many people are you planning for, so you can actually, do your, make your extravagant plans if you're wanting. So always have a good idea of that. Just how many people you're actually going to be cooking for. The next point is, how many people are you going to be needing in the kitchen to make each meal happen. Uh, things like pancakes and bacon and eggs, you don't really need a lot of people in the kitchen for that. You can typically get away with 4 people for something like that. Whereas if you've got a multi-course meal for your main feast, and you've got 2 different proteins, 4 or 5 different side dishes, things like that, you are going to want a good amount of helpers in the kitchen. You want to make sure everybody is staying on task, and you have enough people and enough bodies to do the job necessary. Um, you typically want someone on each dish, so that no one's getting overloaded. And then you want people for things like doing the dishes, uh, collecting dishes from the feast hall, because people always leave stuff on their tables, whether you tell them to or not. They're going to do it. So have someone available to go pick up stuff for the feast hall is going to make your life a lot easier. Next point on menu planning is just allergy planning, and that's, you got to think of your common allergies in your kingdom. I know in Winter's Edge we have a lot of people that are we have pear allergies, we have mango allergies, uh, mushrooms. We have people that don't eat pork for religious reasons, and these are all things that you've got to consider. We also have a lot of gluten-free people, and you've got to consider all this because it doesn't. If someone has a mushroom allergy, it doesn't mean that you can't cook with mushrooms. It does mean that you need to be very careful and safe with those mushrooms to avoid any cross contamination. So that does, knowing what you're working or what allergies you're going to be experiencing or working with will help you plan what you're actually going to cook, because sometimes if of a lot of people have a mushroom allergy, it may not be worth your time to put mushrooms on the menu. It may be more hassle than it's worth. So those are the things that you really need to consider. Typically when I'm running a meal, a good amount of time before the event, I'll actually post a Google form, just asking people to list if they have any food allergies, if they have any dietary restrictions, their persona name and their mundane name, and how many meals they plan on eating at the event, because some people only do day trips, so things like that. The reason I do this is to keep people safe, because allergies can easily kill somebody, and it's a very easy thing to actually avoid. And also with the Google Doc, it's good to, like, once you have that, uh, just keep check on it regularly and speak with the people individually. Because if someone has a lot of different dietary restrictions, a lot of times it may be easier to work with them privately rather than planning the entire feast around them. There was one feast I did where someone had a lot of different allergies and she had dietary restrictions, and she just brought her food, raw, and I cooked it separate for her. So she still got, she didn't have to bring her own, cook her own stuff at her campsite. She still got the same experience of, working, of getting served at the same time as her table and everything else, the whole feast experience. But she was able to make sure she was being fed ingredients that she knew were safe for her. So that was something that we worked out privately. So there's always options like that. So next is let's see. Think about your past meals and menus that you've seen at events. Try and make your meals stand out. I don't like doing things that have been done a million times. You always go to events and you see Friday night it's going to be sandwiches. Usually some kind of meat, and then PB and J, or chilies, chicken noodle soup, vegetable soup, things like that. Pancakes and eggs for breakfast. Try and do something that people haven't seen before. Something that is gonna wow people, I guess you could say. Definitely don't step out, too far outside of your comfort zone, of course, especially if it's your first time running a meal, because while it's good to have that uniqueness, you don't want to set yourself up for failure. So if you are going to step outside your comfort zone, make sure it's something that you can execute very well. Practice at home, things like that. And then let's see, the next thing is just it kind of touched on it with allergies. Your vegetarian options versus your meat options. You've got to have an idea of how many of each of these you're going to cook, because you're never going to have as many vegetarian options as you are meat. I think the most vegetarians I've cooked for at an event was 20, whereas the event had close to 150 people. So while that is a larger number than a lot of events have, it's still not. If I had done 50-50 vegetarian, 50 and meat, I would have had a lot of very angry meat eaters. So yeah, it's definitely getting a good idea. That's where that Google form comes in handy a lot, because then if you get 12 responses for vegetarian, you could plan for 15, 16 vegetarian meals. That way, if more people show up, you're prepared, or if less people show up, they have extras. They can get seconds and things like that. But you don't want, the last thing you want to do is vegetarians show up and find out that the only thing that you need for the rest of the event is the side dishes. Like, here's your side salad, here's your bowl of pasta, here's your whatever. You want them to have a good feast experience because they're paying the same as everyone else. So why should they get a lesser experience when it comes to the food? So the next section is just portion planning. The first tool that I always use whenever I'm planning a meal is allrecipes.com. The great thing about this website is you can search by, you can do searches by your proteins, or search for recipes by your protein, by your, different ingredients, what kind of meal or what meal you're wanting to cook for. And then most of the options or most of the recipes actually have, they have it broken down usually in 4 servings, but there's a tool on it where you can change your serving amount. And when you change your serving amount, it actually goes ahead and adjusts the recipe for you. So one recipe calls for 4 pieces of chicken to serve 4, and you change that to 150. It will adjust. Now it's 150 pieces of chicken, and so on and so forth. So that saves you a lot of just hassle having to do them. Figure things out yourself. Math isn't fun, so let the machine do the math for you. And then also, whenever you're planning your portions, be sure, I always like to round up. I would much rather have a few extra servings than not have enough servings and people don't get to eat. It does cost a little bit more money in the end, but if you're smart about your shopping, that won't matter. And like I said, it's not fun to go to an event, play all day, and then get to feast and you get nothing because you were the last person in the line. That's not fair to that person, and it makes you look like you were ill prepared. So just always try and plan a little bit more. If you got 150 people, planned, maybe shoot for 160 portions. And then the last thing on portion planning is practice your recipes at home. The reason I say this is a lot of times the portions, like especially if you're looking at like side dishes and appetizers, their portions will be for if this is the only side dish you have with that meal. So if it's like a chicken and rice thing, and the rice is 4 portions, but when you actually serve it, it takes up half a plate. It's more like 3 portions. If you see what you're working with at home, you can adjust as needed. So now if something turns out to be a very large side portion, it actually could be split up into 2 different portions. So now you don't need 150, you actually need 75 of that portion, of that recipe portion size. So it helps you make sure you're not going to end up with an extreme excess, because throwing away food at the end of an event is not fun, because you see all that wasted money. that, if you had planned better, it would have turned out better. Next point is on budgeting. Now, how you get your budget is going to depend on your kingdom. Some kingdoms, I know in Winter's Edge, we usually do it one of two ways. Either the regent or autocrat, KPM, whoever is in charge of your money for that event is going to give you your budget to say, hey, you have this much money to spend to feed this many people this many times. Or they're going to put out 4 bids. And basically the bid is just, you've got to figure out, they'll tell you how many people you're planning for. And then you figure out your menu and price it out. Price out each ingredient, and you've got your total number, so that when you turn it into your autocrat, you can say, okay, I can do this feast for 150 people for $300, or whatever you came up with, and then they're going to look at the numbers that you sent with your budget, and then they're going to look at anyone else that may have entered and kind of compare and contrast and make the best decision from that point on who's going to be able to do the meal and do it best. Because even if your meal comes out pricing more, but if you have better a better menu planned, then you still have a good chance of winning over the person that may have a lower overall price, but they're only serving PB&J. So definitely take that into consideration. When you are building your budget, don't stress on your price. I always try and go as cheap as possible, but if it does come out to a larger number than what you expected, don't beat yourself up over anything like that. It is, food is expensive. Now, if your kingdom is the type to just give you the budget, I usually wait till I get my budget and then I plan my menu, because a lot of times you'll get $1,000 budget for 4 meals. That's great. You can do a lot of really cool stuff with $1,000. But then there have been times where I've been given $600 for 4 meals, and you can't do a lot of great stuff with that. You've got to really work and finagle your budget to make that work. So if you have a grandiose idea for an event, but then they give you a very small budget, you wasted your time planning that grandiose idea, because now you've got to completely rework everything. Next on budgeting is shop around. I see a lot of people, they'll just, whenever it comes time to do their shopping, they just go straight to Walmart or Sam's Club. Those are great options. But I usually, when I'm buying, I will go to Costco, Sam's Club, Walmart, Target, Food City, Gordon Food Service, basically anywhere I can get, definitely anywhere I can get stuff in bulk. And then anywhere that, is just going to have good sales. Look at the local sales paper in your, local newspaper. You can find really cool stuff there. But you can, save a lot of money by shopping around. It may take you a little bit longer as far as planning and everything or shopping goes, but in the long run, it's going to be worth it. And then the next point is just have multiple budgets to plan for multiple people. So the way I usually do this is just, it's pretty simple. Like if I have a budget for 150 people, and it costs $500, I'm also going to have a budget for 175 and 200, and I'm going to adjust the price as that moves up, just so that if something does happen and Friday night of the event, that's when you and the event runners realize that you're going to have well over 150 people at your event. you've already got it priced out what adjustments you need to make. That saves you a lot of time and a lot of stress, because if you get in a situation like that, it's your brain isn't going to be firing right unless you just handle stress really well. If you're one of those people that handle stress really well, cool. But me personally, I'm not. That's why I always like to have these extra budgets ready. Uh, and yeah, that's just, like I said, it's just as simple as uh, looking at your current budget and just adjusting for the inflation of people. So yeah, definitely try that. Next point is just a short point on submitting your bid. And this is just how it's typically done in Winter's Edge. With your bid, you always want to include your menu. And I always break the menu down by every ingredient. So it's not just going to say we're cooking lasagna. It's going to say lasagna, then ground this many pounds of ground beef, this many ounces of tomato sauce, and then what the tomato sauce, like how many cans of tomato sauce it's going to take. And of course, how many packages of beef it's going to take. So if you need 15 pounds of meat and they come in 1 pound rolls, you're going to need 15 rolls. How much each roll costs? That needs to be in your breakdown. Everything, even if it's something like salt, you wouldn't think salt is super cheap. You can get a lot of it for $1, but it still needs to be in your breakdown. It doesn't need to be left alone or ignored. Everything you plan on using your kingdom funds for needs to be accounted for in your budget and in your menu. Um, Other things I like to include in my budget or in my bid: how many people I'll need to be working. So if I'm planning something that's going to take 15 bodies in the kitchen working constantly, is that something that's realistic to ask for? So that's, you've got to find 15 volunteers that are going to go to an event and work the entire time in the kitchen rather than go outside and play with their friends. So that's a big ask. So the less people that you're going to rely on, the more realistic your bid is going to be. And of course, also keeping track of or listing how much time each dish has is going to be helpful as well, as far as the event runners planning goes, because they know your feast is going to take an hour to prep and 2 hours to cook. They can put that into their thought process when they're planning their games and what time feast is going to be, what time to start bringing people into the feast hall, things like that. So it's definitely good to be very forthcoming with any information on what you're doing. Let's see. The next section is working with volunteers. First thing I always like to do whenever I'm doing anything at an event, or running anything at an event, that is I keep a notebook with me, just like a composite notebook. And whenever people come into the area that I'm working, they sign their name and what park they're from. Uh, that way, because I'm bad with names, and doing it this way has made it where I'm able to remember, okay, random kid A came in and did dishes for 2 hours. He does, if someone comes into your area and decides to help you, they deserve the recognition for doing that. Obviously it's not always going to end up in an award, but you should at least recommend whatever you can. So you always have that book available, and then whenever your volunteer is done and they step out and say, "Hey, I'm done. I'm going to go play, in the battle game now." Just thank them, and then go over to your notebook and write down what they did. That way, you don't have to try and remember. If you get 50 volunteers at an event, you don't have to remember what 50 random people did. You have it written down at the time that it happened, just to make it easier on you. The next point is just be appreciative of your volunteers. They are making your goal come true. You're the one that signed up to run a meal, to run a feast, to run all the meals. they don't have to step in the kitchen to help you. They are choosing to take the time that they basically paid for this weekend to come and assist you. So make sure you understand how great they understand how grateful you are for their time, because they could just easily be outside work or outside playing. Next point: never assume that someone has the same knowledge that you do when it comes to cooking or prepping or anything. Uh, Always break down what you're wanting done, exactly how you're wanting it done. It's good to actually demo it for them. So if you're wanting carrots cut in a certain way or peppers cut in a certain way, you just sit down, grab a carrot or pepper or whatever it is, and show them exactly how you want them to do it. Then hand them the knife and have them do it exactly how you just showed them. The reason for this is just while you running the event running the meal have some level of idea of how to cook, you may have some kid that has never cooked for himself and his or herself in their entire life. Let they aren't going to know what you mean when you say cut this pepper into fine strips. They're just going to sit there and look at it, hold a knife in their hand, and then probably get bored and walk away. So just assume they don't know anything, and show take the 1 to 2 minutes to show exactly how you want it done. Because that 1 to 2 minutes that you're spending on that right then is going to save you more time down the road when you realize that they haven't started cutting anything and they've been sitting there for half an hour. So just go ahead and do it right away. And that does go not I mentioned as that is a prep work thing, but that does go for even simpler things like scrambling eggs. Never just assume everybody knows how to do it. Show them what you're wanting done and make sure they have a good understanding. Um, Next point is just make sure they have your volunteers have everything they need to be successful. And make sure they have all knives, bowls, spoons, all equipment that they need to do their job. Make sure they have it. They shouldn't have to be. If you send someone to go, uh, you know, do prep work for your salad, they shouldn't have to search all over the kitchen for a knife. You should, give them a cutting board and a knife when you tell them that's what you're needing them to do. Don't make them go on a wild goose chase when you should already know where everything is because you're the one in charge of the kitchen in the first place. You're managing things, so you should already know cutting boards are on this shelf, knives are in this drawer, or on that wall, or whatever. Um, and then not just tools. Make sure make sure people are staying comfortable. If it's hot in the kitchen, try and round up some fans, open doors, do whatever you can to keep them physically comfortable as well. Make sure they're staying hydrated. If it's an early morning meal, make sure they are they have their coffee. Make sure they're whatever they need in the morning to function. Make sure they're getting that. Um, and then also keep track of this. Kind of goes along with comfort, but keep track of how they look. But a lot of times people will get so engrossed in what they're doing, they'll ignore like if they're starting to feel bad, feel sick, lightheaded, things like that. So try and keep an eye out for that. Make sure people are doing things safely. You won't want anybody in the kitchen working with you and they just pass out. That's bad for everybody. Um, so the next point is just time management. There's just a couple points on this. Of course, you've got to know your cooking time for each dish, because your cooking time for each dish is gonna help you prioritize, your things like your stovetops, your ovens, God forbid microwaves, but any kind of heating element. It's gonna, if your protein is gonna take an hour to cook, but your carrots are gonna take 10 minutes to cook. Obviously, you're not gonna put your carrots in first because then they're gonna be cold by the time the chicken is done. Uh, so you've got to really know how long each dish is going to take, each port or each element of that dish, how long each element is going to take, because that's going to make sure you get things cooked in a way where it's all going to be served hot. You don't want anything to be served, cool, or that's been, in a heat lamp for so long it's dried out. You want people to enjoy the meal that you're working hard to cook for them. Next point on on prioritizing your tools. It's not just your heating elements. A lot of some kitchens, when you go to an event site, are going to be fully stocked. They're going to have everything you would ever wish for a meal. But then some kitchens, you're going to go in, it's going to have 2 cast iron skillets, a fork that may be plastic, maybe not, and maybe some serving spoons. So you've got to, and when you have that limited resource, you've got to be able to prioritize which element of the dish is going to need the tools the most. Uh, if you're, and that's, don't really want to think of an example for that because that's such a a specific thing. But you've just got to look at what tools you have before you actually start cooking, and plan from that point. Because if you don't want to end up in a situation where you've got 2 people waiting for the same dish, uh, because you only have one of that dish. Uh, Another thing to think about with this is wash times. If you are limited on your cooking utensils, uh, bowls, pans, things like that, you want to have somebody that's designated just to the sink, because if they are just designated to washing every dish that's handed to them, these dishes are going to become available much faster than if you just throw them all into the sink. And then 10 minutes later, you've got a full sink of dishes, and you've got to find somebody to dig through it and find this one spoon that you need. If someone is just constantly there, just banging out dishes, washing them, putting them aside, washing them, putting them aside, uh, your downtime is going to be much lower. So the next point is one that's typically harder for a lot of people because it kind of depends on your personality. But dealing with less than helpful volunteers. Of course, everyone that comes in the kitchen to help, you're very appreciative of them taking the time to help you. But sometimes there are going to be situations where the person just came in because their friend was already in the kitchen and they just wanted to hang out with their friend, or they want to seem like they're, there are going to be cases where someone just wants to be seen where the work is happening, but they don't actually want to do the work. In situations like this, you kind of just do it by case. No one situation is the same. But basically, what you're going to do is, if they're just kind of all over the place, one thing I like to do with people like that are just bouncing from spot to spot is I'll set them up with kind of a mentor. Whoever my person in the kitchen, that would be kind of my second in command. That has worked with me a lot. I know that I can trust them to stay on task. I will take the random helper and put them with the mentor. That way, the mentor can be right there with them, and making sure that they are staying on task. If it's the type of person that just isn't wanting to do work at all, uh, make them do things that are less taxing. If they just want to just kind of stand around, are you cooking soup? Let them stir something. Uh, you know, make them do something that is going to be very easy to do and very hard to mess up, because then they're still helping. They are still being a usable person, but they're not just in the way. The last part is the hardest part. And it's just know when to dismiss somebody. If someone has been in the kitchen for an hour and they've done nothing productive, they've slowed things down more than they've helped. You've got to be able to just say, hey, I appreciate your assistance today, but I think we're good for now. You can say that you'll call them later. Calling them later if you need more help, but you've got to be able to figure out some way to get them out of the kitchen, out of your way, without seeming like a jerk and hurting feelings. Because they did typically come in with good intentions of helping. They just weren't that person, and that's not necessarily their fault. So there's no point in being rude to them about it. So the next point is server timing. You got to figure out how many servers you're going to have, and how many tables you're serving, how many people are going to be at each table, and then your serving style. So the two typical types of servings that we do in My Kingdom Winter's Edge are either we'll have table by table come up and serve themselves. With that, you basically only need someone at each dish on wherever you're serving the food from. You'll just want someone there to make sure no one's taking too much, uh, make sure everything's being sanitary. Dishes fall into the food. Make sure there's someone there that can grab tongs or something, fish it out, and put a new dish there to serve. Or of course, just having people there that are actually going to serve. That's always the best bet in my opinion, because you get better portion control. The other way that we've done meals in the past in Winter's Edge is each table is served separately. So we'll have servers go out carrying the trays of food. Let's say each table has 8 people sitting at it, so they're going to take out 8 portions of food of each element of the meal to each table, set them down usually in the little aluminum uh, you know cake trays, and you just set it out and they serve themselves. That's fun too. It just depends on what how you're envisioning things going. I personally like having people come up, but I have been a server where you're going out and you're getting refills, you're taking food to tables, things like that, and that's a lot of fun as well. And I think a lot of people enjoy being on the receiving end of that, because they get to sit and really immerse themselves in the LARP feast. The next point is what to do when things go wrong, because things are always going to go wrong. It may be small, it may be major, but something is going to happen. And the first point is just stay calm. You're going to want to freak out, you're going to want to panic, but you've got to stay as calm as you can, because if you're freaking out, you're not being a productive member of the group. Especially when you're the one in charge of the meal, you're the leader in this situation. You've got to at least make it look like you're calm, collected, and prepared. You may not be calm and collected, but you have to fake it till you make it. Because when people that are in there working for you see that you're freaking out, they are going to freak out. And when everybody in the kitchen freaks out, nothing gets done. People don't eat, food gets served raw, things like that. You don't want that. So definitely just stay as calm as you can, and then listen to everybody around you, because the people that are in there that are helping you, any suggestion they make is trying to be productive. It's not like they're trying to just throw things out just to catch you off guard and mess things up more. They want the meal to happen just as badly as you do. So always listen to any suggestion that comes to you. And then next point is be flexible. With that, it's just be prepared for kind of be prepared for something to go wrong, and have some kind of backup. Be prepared, be ready for when you do have to do things a different way, because it's going to make it just more peaceful on you if you've already got that mindset of, okay, if this goes wrong, I can do it this way, I can do it this way. If we don't have this many, if we only have this many ovens, we can do it in, cook in this order and still get everything done. If the stovetop is messed up, we can make up for time here. If you are already in that kind of mindset where you're going to roll with the punches, you're going to be much better off in the end. Next point, don't overcomplicate your solutions. Sometimes what may seem like the dumbest and simplest solution may be the best solution. You don't have to MacGyver everything where you've got a toothpick, a rubber band, and a paper clip, and you've got to make a brand new oven out of it. You can just say, okay, well, the oven's not working. Well, we can put things on the stovetop and cook it there. That is a simple solution. It may not be ideal depending on what you're cooking, but it gets the job done. It's still a heating element that works, and that's what you're needing in that situation. There's always a way to get around things. Next point is something that I think a lot of people, myself included, have had issues with, is being solution oriented. And what I mean by that is just try not to be negative, try not to just sit there and dwell on, okay, well, we're cooking lasagna and all the ovens are broken. If you sit there and dwell on that, it's gonna it's gonna mess everything up and just cost you time that you don't really have. Whereas, if you are only trying to think of what can be done to get your meal done, to move on past this obstacle, you're gonna run into a solution much faster. So just try and think only towards your end goal. Don't try and think of, or don't dwell on that speed bump. And then the last thing I've kind of touched on it a couple times is just kind of think outside the box with things. The example I've given the last 2 times I've done this class is I was cooking lasagna at an event, and our ovens did all the ovens broke. Apparently it was a known issue prior to the event, but I didn't know about it until I got in there and we were putting lasagnas in the oven. After about 20 minutes of sitting in the oven on like 500, they were still cold. So what we ended up doing was taking each individual pan of lasagna, wrapping it in aluminum foil, and then getting the metal casserole dishes that the site had. Each one held 2 pans of lasagna. We put it in that, put water in the base of that, and cooked it on the stovetop. So that the water, when it came to the boil, it was cooking lasagna, that way. It took a bit longer, but it worked. People got fed, and that was just something that I had randomly seen on like Food Network years before as a solution. It made it. If it's dumb but it works, it's not dumb kind of situations. So I always think, try and think outside the box as best as you can. At this point, there's only 2 more points, pretty quick. The next thing is tips and tricks. These are things that I've kind of picked up on over the years of doing meals. The first thing is any kind of disposable utensils or food trays. It's just smart. It may cost a little bit more money in your budget, but saving on doing dishes is amazing. Having to wash every plate for 150 people is just not fun. Whereas if they have, like I mentioned earlier, the paper carnival trays where they can just eat out of it and then throw it away, that saves you a whole lot of time. And a lot of people really like those because they don't have to sit down at a table and eat. They're able to step outside and walk. They're able to go to a picnic table or go smoke with their friends, whatever they need to do. They're not limited to just sitting at the table. And then I always avoid large plates. If you have a 12-inch plate and a 9-inch plate, I would always go with the 9-inch plate. The reason behind that is portions, your normal portion size is going to look smaller on a larger plate. If people get a plate and they see a bunch of empty spots on the plate, they're going to think that the people in the kitchen are skimping. And also if it's a situation where people are serving themselves, if they have a big plate, they're going to want to cover that plate. So they're going to serve themselves more of each thing. And that means your serving size is just your portion sizes that is just changed. Because now instead of everybody getting one portion, they're getting 1.5 portions. And that means that person that last table to come up and serve is going to have maybe 0.5 servings of each option. And it's not fair to those people. So if you have smaller plates, it's going to make your food, make it look like you're giving them a more bountiful feast. And that, kind of it's a trick of the eyes, and it just makes you look better. So yeah, always, like I said, just always avoid the larger plates if you can, that is. And this last point is just things I like to avoid. The first one and probably biggest one being unrealistic goals. If you've got a $200 budget and an hour to, 2 hours to cook the meal, you're not going to want to cook lamb. You're going to want to cook something cheap and quick, chicken, beef, things like that. You don't want to, go crazy with your planning because it's just going to set you up to fail. Always be realistic with what you're planning. Never change your timeline unless you just completely have to. Always try and if you say you're going to have feast out at 6 and you're going to start cooking at 4, don't start cooking at 3. Even if you have you can start doing some prep work, but don't do any major changes to that timeline. Because if you start cooking an hour earlier, that means you're getting done an hour earlier, and you can't, even though you are ready at 5, they're still battle gaming at 5, but they weren't planning on being ready for feast till 6. So that means your food is going to sit there for an hour, maybe in like a heating box, maybe in a low heat oven, or just maybe on a counter where it's going to get cold and gross. So always stick with your timeline, because that's what the rest of the event is going to be planned around, is when your meals are. I touched on this earlier with the allergens. Cross-contamination, that's how people die. People, food allergies are a very, very serious thing, and killing your friends are very bad most of the time. So don't do it, if that makes sense. With avoiding cross-contamination, if you are working with an allergen, and you've got like with the lasagna, we had a gluten pan and non-gluten vegetarian pans. I prepped those far away from where we were prepping the gluten, because I didn't want to risk anything. You don't want the same, spoons touching, each dish. You want, fresh spoons for the non-gluten, fresh spoons for the vegetarian, things like that. You always want to make sure that you are not, touching anything with things that shouldn't be touching. And this also includes, cleaning your workspace. If you put something like meat on a cutting board, be sure to wash that cutting board right away. Wash the table, sanitize the table that you've been working on. Even if you didn't see anything touch the table directly, when you're done working on it, wipe it down. It's just better safe than sorry. And then, of course, when you're storing your food, keep your allergens away from away from things. So if you are working with mushrooms, but there are people that are allergic to mushrooms, keep your mushrooms bagged in a separate area, just so that there's no accidents that could happen. Next point on things to avoid is wasting. Wasting food, wasting non-food items like aluminum foil, plastic silverware, things like that. It's when you get to a site, most sites that I've been to at least are typically about half an hour to an hour away from civilization. So if you get there and you are relying on aluminum foil, but then the night before you made aluminum foil balls and threw them across the feast hall at you and your friends, now you've got to figure out an hour in your busy schedule on Saturday to make it out to a store to get more aluminum foil. Whereas if you just don't waste it in the first place, you won't run into the issue like that. And it's the same with any of your food products. Make sure you're not leaving cold stuff out. If you have butter, don't just leave it on the counter. Get what you need, put it back in the fridge. You don't want anything to go bad, because that's just wasteful. And then this is the last point that I've got here, and this is something that it took me a while to actually get used to as well, is don't let people derail you. And this, I kind of touched on this with the less than helpful volunteers as well, but it is an important thing. That's why it's got its own line. If you're running a feast, running a lunch, running a meal, whatever, your friends are gonna want your friends that aren't helping are gonna want to come in and say hi, especially if they're friends that you only get to see at events. They're gonna want to come in and say, "Hey, how are you doing? How's life? What's going on? What's new?" While you're working, you gotta love your friends. They're just wanting to come in and check on you. But if they are, you know, not helping the situation, if they are distracting you from being productive, you've got to be able to tell them, "Hey, I love you. You're my friend. Get the hell out." And this doesn't just go for your friends. If other crats are coming in, if your work crats coming in and bugging you about, scheduling, and then you get with them, get whatever scheduling issue fixed as quickly as possible. Tell them to get out. If your autocrats are coming in and they're just hassling you about when is this going to be done, when is that going to be done, and they aren't actually being a constructive member of the room, tell them to get the hell out. Because the kitchen is your area, and that's where you're in charge. Yes, the autocrats are going to be in charge of the event, but they are supposed to be helping you. If they are just adhering you, then tell them to go away. If they want to, explain why. I obviously don't just say get out. Explain why you need them to leave. Because once you explain, either they can adjust adjust how they're acting, or just they can leave. Those are their options. But if you got to be able to tell people when they are harming the situation. Otherwise, they're just going to stay there and keep messing things up, and it's going to affect everything. It's going to be a snowball effect where it's going to be one after another, and then no one gets to eat. So yeah, that's really all I've got there. Thank you so much for letting me do this again. Really appreciated.
Thank you for teaching. And also, I love it. Like, I love you. Get the hell out now.
I've had to do it at multiple events where it's like, yeah, it's great to see you. We haven't seen each other in 6 months. I'm busy and we can talk later. Get out.
Right now.
Yeah, like if you want to be in here, be scrubbing a dish. Like if you don't want to scrub dishes, get out of my face.
All right, I'm gonna stop recording now, unless anybody has anything they want to say to be on recording. Nope. All right, stop recording.